see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
What is the name of this event here? This is a panel discussion about your article?
I think we're talking, we're talking about empathy. We're talking about perspective taking. We're talking about what I think it's Steven Pinker who said that empathy alone without the perspective taking element is insufficient to move the needle on the decline of violence. And you guys took a look at my quick dashed off blog post about Steven Pinker's ideas. And I think that, by the time I got to the end of your analysis, it appeared to me that we were really just using different terms for the same things. And I think it was you, Edwin, who said, empathy and perspective taking are the same thing. But I was trying to distinguish between, and I think that Pinker was trying to distinguish between the emotional experience of empathy and the intellectual capacity for taking someone else's point of view.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should just start with introductions. I'm Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. And we have Joe Brewer and Victoria, you pronounce that Pynchon?
Pynchon.
Pynchon.
Like pinch with an on it.
Okay. Would you like to introduce yourself, Victoria? A little bit about yourself?
Sure. I spent 25 years litigating commercial cases. Toward the end of that career, I did a lot of environmental insurance coverage litigation, antitrust securities. So I was in the business most of my career of moving large sums of monies between one company that could afford it and another, which I considered morally neutral. And I eventually got tired of being in the adversarial system, as everybody I know does. And I don't know, I was probably spent the last 10 years looking for a way out, but I couldn't get out without having something that really arrested my attention because they pay you so much money to fight. And because it's intellectually stimulating. You're in a community of people who are like smart, whip smart, and you get to work with them. And so there are a lot of really good things about practicing law. The most depressing thing about it is that it's so ineffective and it's so inefficient. So I took mediating the litigated case at the Strauss Institute, which I'm currently boycotting. And I'm happy to tell you about that later. I got my LLM there. And I started mediating as soon as I took that first course. That led me to arbitration with the American Arbitration Association, and because the ADR profession is more sexist than I could possibly have imagined, I gravitated toward women and teaching women how to negotiate. Formed a business called She Negotiates Consulting and Training, and that's sort of where you found me on Forbes Woman, where we write a blog called She Negotiates. Oh. So I finally found my bliss in my 50s.
Great. And Joe?
Who knew?
I'm Joe Brummer. I'm the Associate Executive Director at Community Mediation in Hamden, Connecticut. I'm also a board member of NAFCM, the National Association for Community Mediation. Not that I'm speaking on behalf of any of those groups today. For a lot of the same reasons, I'm a mediator because I don't think our legal system covers everything it needs to cover. And I think that mediation and alternative dispute resolution is a much stronger way of dealing with conflict. I'm surprised to hear you say that that the ADR is sexist. I've never heard that before. I'd love to hear more about that. So, at least the community mediation field is as I've met it, has been very dominated by women.
Yes, that's because it's poor. And it's because it involves people. So the hierarchy in the American economic structure is the less you deal with people and the more you deal with corporate entities, the more you get paid. The more you deal with people, social workers, therapists, community mediators, the less you get paid and the less valued your work is, even though the work that you're doing, I believe, is the most important work to be done on the planet right now. But so is art. And
That's funny because I think the same thing.
art is not tremendously successful either. Successful in the sense of, economically powerful. So powerful, very powerful, but not economically lucrative.
Well, what started this discussion is that, as you were saying, Victoria, you wrote an article in Forbes, and it was entitled "Great Negotiators Think with Their Heads, Not Their Hearts."
Correct.
And then Joe and I came across that, and then we wrote kind of a response to that. And could perhaps, just to kind of set this up, could you kind of outline what it was that you wrote and what your kind of arguments were?
Well, I was channeling Steven Pinker, who wrote The Better Angels of Our Natures, The Decline of Violence. And that's an 800 and some page book. I think it took me about 9 months to read. Toward the end of the book, he talks about empathy being one of the ways in which violence declines, to teach people to be empathic toward one another. And when you develop empathic responses, you, like Bill Clinton, feel the other person's pain and don't so much feel like tormenting them or torturing them. The studies that he cited on empathy on the one hand and perspective taking on the other showed that people who were very empathic did not necessarily work out the best negotiated resolutions, that they could feel the pain of the other person, that they sympathized with the other person, but that they, by failing to actively place themselves cognitively in the other person's shoes, they didn't come up with creative solutions to the problem presented. So that was a surprise to me, and it was the first time I'd heard it, and as soon as I hear something new, I write about it. So I'm certainly no expert on the topic, other than the fact that I do have expertise in negotiation and mediation, obviously.
Yeah, so Joe and I read through your article, and then we had an hour-long discussion where we kind of went through and looked at the different points and responded to it, and that's kind of
Great.
what led to this discussion that we're having here.
Right, and as I said, by the end of that, I would say generously, essentially tearing apart what I had proposed, which I'm used to. I'm a litigator. I'm used to that. It's fine. Because it makes me think, it makes me rethink, which is the great thing about blogging, and is the great thing about these kinds of discussions, is that we have the opportunity to raise everyone's consciousness and to poke around in where the weaknesses are, so that we can be as effective as possible in helping people find solutions to their problems. There's a chapter in my book, the Grown-Ups ABCs of Conflict Resolution, called N is for Neighbor, in which I give an example of perspective taking. We knew our neighbors were selling their house because it's a family of four. The woman lost her job. The husband is a professor of Romance languages at UCLA, and you know how the economy respects that. So they couldn't pay their mortgage, and everyone felt a great deal of sympathy for them. But I said, what if we had put ourselves not only in their shoes, but been able to project ourselves into a future in which losing them would actually be damaging to our little neighborhood community? And if we did that, we would probably actually come forth with resources for them to help them stay in the neighborhood. So the example I gave was one of the groups who, and it's a made up example, one of the groups looking at the house as a fraternity house. And the neighborhood, of course, would immediately get up in arms and want to organize and keep the fraternity house out. And that would incentivize us to simply help our neighbors stay rather than take the litigated solution, which is to, run into court and seek restraining orders, et cetera. So I guess I've been talking about perspective taking, cognitive perspective taking, as opposed to simply empathy for a long time. But I know that your perspective is that when I use the term empathy, I'm really saying sympathy. And that you, Edwin, I think at the end of your discussion had said empathy really includes perspective taking, at which point we have no argument and nothing to talk about.
Yeah, I think
So-
a large part of this seems to be, a large part of this seems to be about the definition of empathy, and there is a lot of confusion about what empathy, if you really start getting into the nuts and bolts of it, it's more complicated than just, standing in someone else's shoes and how you do that. So the perspective in the definition that I had mentioned in before was it's kind of empathy is like a 4 parts to it. There's the self-empathy, the mindfulness, awareness of yourself, the emotional empathy, the mirroring. As we're watching each other, our mirror neurons are watching, are mirroring each other's action. Then there's a third part, which is kind of imaginative empathy or perspective taking, which is what you're addressing. And then the fourth part is empathic action. And a nice definition I've heard for empathic action is when it's action where the blocks, empathic action is when the blocks to action are removed that don't exclude. So it's like when people are, for example, in mediation, which you've both done, is that that when the parties come together and they've heard each other and they've kind of taken each other's perspective and there's this negotiation about what they're going to do, and there's kind of like a smoothness within that listening to each other, and there's like an action component. So that's kind of the 4 parts. So in that sense, the perspective taking is very much part of empathy.
In which case we have no differences.
Right, in that sense. So, but then the other part that we had was the part about sympathy, and I think Joe made quite a point about that, saying, yeah, I don't want people's sympathy either. And it was that empathy and sympathy are 2 different phenomenon. The empathy is kind of that emotional mirroring or taking someone's perspective. And if I see someone in distress, I can mirror their distress as their distress. But the sympathy is, oh, you're in distress, I feel bad too. So it's like a secondary experience, or maybe a sense of, oh, I feel pity for you, or I feel, that something like that. So I think it's just this whole, kind of teasing apart the different parts of empathy and sympathy and so forth. I think that, we need a little clarity around.
Let's talk about how difficult it is. I lost your audio.
Are you?
Yeah, I lost your audio.
Oh, do you still hear me, or?
Are you there?
Yeah. Let me just restart here.
It's probably mine.
No, you sound fine now.
Yeah, I hear you.
Crackled up for a second.
Yeah, it's because of the Wi-Fi.
Oh, yeah.
Should have plugged this directly in, and at this point,
Yeah.
it takes me time to do because I'm not that tech savvy.
I'm on Wi-Fi.
Hopefully, it'll work. But let's talk about how difficult this is to do in 3 hours.
How difficult it is to do with 3 hours?
Yeah, let's talk about how difficult it is to help people do what you're talking about doing in 3 hours. Because the reality in many court programs in most of the major cities is that most mediators in those programs give away 3 hours of their time. And the parties have gotten used to getting that 3 hours free, which is a whole other discussion. But that's pretty much what you have. You have 3 hours to help to do all of these things. And God knows, to me, it seems miraculous whenever I'm able to help the parties do it in that period of time. Nevertheless, I think that we've asked an enormous amount of ourselves in the mediation community to cover all of these bases and to bring these people from a state of demonization of the other, autistic hostility, confirmation bias, fear of just speaking to one another. I mean, and to do all this in as short a time as we do it, and with as many mediators who are poorly trained as they are, which lowers everyone's expectations about the possibility for results.
People that are saying they're doing mediation and aren't doing mediation.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd like to do, I do have this book coming out in a month now called the Dummy's Guide to Success as a Mediator, and the reason I wrote it is certainly not for the money. The reason I wrote it is because I was hoping that it would help set some standards in the mediation community nationwide. And what I'd like to do, if the three of us can, is to help the less well-trained mediator use these principles of empathy and perspective taking to both increase their hope that mediation will be able to do the job we keep claiming to do, and just some suggestions about what to do when everybody is saying the other side's acting eighth and I won't talk to them and I don't believe a word they say, etc., and that we have this very limited amount of time to do. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that from your empathy perspective.
I think 3 hours is generous. I know when I was doing mediation,
3 hours is generous.
Well, I did small claims court in Rhode Island for a couple of years, and I think with some parties, we had an hour. And if they didn't really come to some sort of solution within that hour, they ended up going back before the judge. And surprisingly, and it's probably because it's the nature of small claims, that I think the vast majority of people that come into small claims are not coming in because they actually want what they're suing for. They're coming in because they have a gripe. And they want
they're angry, right?
They want a chance to be heard.
Yes.
And I think in those cases, empathy, sort of getting people the empathy that they want and taking the time to say, yes, I understand your situation and how difficult this has been for you. How do we make it better? And
right.
That seems to work. I think in other mediations that I've done, I think it's a process that people, they don't just need the empathy from us as mediators. They like getting it. They like knowing that other person across the table gets their pain.
Right.
And that seems to make a difference. And, aside from things like nonviolent communication, which I think has been an amazing tool, it's one of the best tools I ever learned as a mediator, as far as being able to help people hear each other in ways that they hadn't before.
Are either of you doing any litigated case mediation?
I'm not doing mediation. I'm working on the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. So organizing, community organizing, and hosting panel discussions and that kind of thing. I've done some NVC training, some, just conflict resolution training, restorative circles training, but haven't really been actively using it.
Well, let me ask you this: Is there an area of your practice that you think that mediator-gated cases could incorporate in our practice, or is there anything that that you think I might have useful to you, given the fact that I spent 25 years and actually in more than 30 years now in the commercial arena, which is an arena that has the potential to change lives for millions of people.
You're looking for the real nuts and bolts kind of ways?
I guess I'm always looking for the effective, more efficient way to help people do what's genuinely best for them. The difference between the three of us, I think, is that lawyers are part of the job, and they are not easy. So there are the dispute resolutions that are taking place in my office is the dispute resolution between the attorneys or among the attorneys if there are multiple ones. The lack of communication had with their clients, and then the client's attitudes toward their attorney and the legal system, and then the dispute that started it all. And I try and move as quickly as possible to the dispute that started it all, but you cannot ignore the angriest people in the room, and the angriest, most frustrated people in the room are the attorneys, because we went to law school because we thought we could achieve justice, and it's like the most frustrating experience in the world to be answering contention interrogatories and getting, boilerplate objections back. And so, I came into the profession seeing improving the legal system, at least insofar as, the agony part of legal practice could be minimized. A lot of mediators say, oh, it would be easy if it weren't for the lawyers. And my response is, the lawyers are your job. The lawyers.
Well, I think that's a growing area of law or it seems, I know they just had a competition at Quinnipiac. And the idea is to start teaching lawyers advocacy and mediation skills, so that they know how to act in a mediation and that they know how to best represent their client and still be able to take the perspective and empathize with the other side, so that we work towards mutually satisfying agreements versus I'm going to rip you for everything I can, and which is sort of the typical legal system.
Right.
And so I think it's a growing area where we're starting to teach lawyers that. And I think the most important, I think what a lot of attorney mediators struggle with, and I think it's by training, it's hard for them to realize that when you're a mediator, you've got to take off that legal hat. You can't be an attorney and a mediator at the same time. That, because it changes your role in the mediation.
Well, you can't be giving legal advice, but I can tell you that you can never stop being a lawyer.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't take a different point of view. It doesn't mean you can't lead from interest-based negotiation. It doesn't mean that that you're trying to help the parties serve their interests rather than their legal rights. But I think that the non-legal mediation communities greatest, the thing that it needs more of is the recognition that people need to know what their rights are. And then they can choose whether they want to pursue their remedies or not. But putting people in, for instance, positions of unequal power, with one party knowing what their legal rights are and the other party not, and putting a lawyer mediator into the mix and then asking them not to think like a lawyer is impossible. It's just impossible. You can't fail to recognize that one party has superior bargaining power and is going to use it.
So, but here's my question to you, and it's one of the tenets of mediation as I understand them, and that would be self-determination. That people have, first and foremost, a right to dictate their own life. And if you go to your party and say that you perceive as being the less power balanced because they don't have an attorney representing them, or that pro se case, that, and you've said to them, look, between this session and the next session, I think, I want to make sure that you all know that you have the right to consult with an attorney if you want to. And they say, no, I don't want to. Don't they have a right to make that self-determination?
Oh, yeah. And
so, that's where I think...
I don't know any mediator that would interfere with that. I'm just saying that you can't help but be conscious that the power imbalance is influencing self-determination, because you can't have self-determination if you're in a state of ignorance. And you can't have self-determination if you're chronically in a state of powerlessness, particularly when your primary response to power is to attempt to trade what little power you have for sympathy, and essentially throw yourself on the mercy of the other side. I can't, as a blogger in this area, I can't tell you the number of people who have written to me and who call me, who tell me that the mediator and the lawyers, both lawyers, have ganged up on them and overcome their will. And because I got my LLM and I had to do a fair number of hours of observation, I can tell you that I find current litigated case mediation practice horrifying. For the most part, horrifying.
And that sounds like why you wrote this next book about training, is that, because I've heard those stories too, the sort of horror stories of people who have gone through mediation, and especially divorce mediation, where the mediator wasn't trained as well as they could be. And in the end, people had a horrible experience with mediation. And I think you're right. I think that comes down to a standards issue about training and mediation.
This takes us to sexism, where I'm dying to go.
Before we get
Edwin, go ahead.
Before we get to the sexism, I wanted to kind of frame this in a larger picture, because kind of what I'm working on is what I call building a culture of empathy, and that kind of overlaps with all the different institutions within society, and the legal field is just one of those institutions. So for me, it's how to transform the legal system and the justice system to being more empathy-based versus retributive-based. And I just interviewed Kim Wright. I think you're friends with her on Facebook, I noticed, from Cutting Edge Law, and Charlie Helpern, who's kind of does legal mindfulness kind of type work at UC Berkeley, Bolt Hall, and Peter Gable, who's, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's an editor at Tikkun magazine, and started kind of a spirituality in the legal field kind of organization.
Right.
And so Peter's kind of analysis of the whole, he goes right to the core of the whole legal field, saying it's kind of framed on this notion that people are greedy, selfish, self-interested, entities, and that they're up in a gladiatorial combat against each other. And the lawyer is kind of like your gladiator who is fighting for your self-interest. And that's like a whole model that the legal system is based on, versus a system that's based on what's sometimes called restorative justice, or what I would actually call restorative empathy. It's trying to create a connection, recreate connection, or even create connection that hasn't been there in the first place between people. So for example, people in mediation, when they're coming out with a horrible feeling, it's like they haven't been heard.
That's correct.
They're feeling like, well, I just got run over. I haven't been heard. So at the end of the mediation, the question should be, has everybody in this mediation felt totally heard to the full extent that they want to be heard? And if somebody says, no, I feel shitty, then we don't have an empathic connection, really.
Right.
So,
and the problem with litigated cases is that the clients are often instructed by their attorneys not to speak.
Yeah.
So of course they haven't been heard. A recent case that hasn't yet settled, but I believe will. The parties were not allowed to speak, and at the end of the first session, I looked at the man. It was a commercial dispute over a contaminated piece of property, and I looked at the man of the couple who owned this piece of property and said, boy, you look really unhappy. Am I reading that wrong? And he said, no, I'm actually really happy. And I said, well, would you like to share with me your feelings about how the day went? And he said, well, I can tell you that the first mediation I had before this one, the first thing the mediator did, and this is an attorney mediator, was to walk into the room, sit down at the head of the table, look at me and say, you've got an alter ego problem. And so much for hope and safety. And he said, that was it. That was the last time I listened to him. So he said, I feel for the first time today as if I've been heard, which is the reason why I think that we have a good chance to settle the case. And of course, that made me feel good. It unfortunately, reemphasized my concerns about the legal mediation field. Did either of you see The Nightmare Before Christmas?
No.
Oh, years ago.
Tim Burton?
Yeah.
So here, The Nightmare Before Christmas is Jack-o'-lantern, who is responsible for Halloween, decides he wants to do Christmas. So he kidnaps Saint Nick and he does Christmas. And what does Christmas look like, do you think?
Halloween.
Halloween. It looks like Halloween. So legal mediation is really a Halloween Christmas, because what the lawyers do is they use mediation as part of the gamesmanship of litigation. And everything that they do is taking a process that is meant to be adversarial and taking a process meant to be non-adversarial and using it in the aid of the adversarial gladiatorial contest.
And you have to ask, is that mediation, or is that people doing a settlement conference and calling it mediation?
Well, I know that that's an issue in the mediation community. I don't really much care about labels, because I've seen settlement conference judges conduct a settlement conference mediatively, and I've seen mediators do what is is evaluative mediation.
Yeah. Which I have to say, I'm not terribly a fan of evaluative mediation. I'm sure it has its place, but I personally am not a fan.
It's all it's all a way in. Here's the thing about this stuff. It's all a way in. You have to know, you know this. You have to know who who your parties are, you have to empathize, Edwin. You have to empathize with the attorneys. And this is the great failure of people coming from community mediation who are irritated at the attorneys who are maddening. But if you're going to mediate litigated cases, you have to empathize first with the attorneys, get where they're at, stand in their shoes, take their perspective, and then lead them out. There's this concept, Edwin, maybe you're familiar with it, called the zone of proximal development.
Haven't heard of it, no.
It's a learning term. So it says like babies learn in manageable stretches. So when you're teaching a baby how to talk, you say ball, and the baby says ba, right? And you say good baby, ba, ball, ball, and the baby says ba, and you go good baby, and you encourage the baby until he says ball, and then eventually blue ball, and then big blue ball, but you can't move baby from no words to big blue ball. So, and I know that both of you are trained in micro communication, right?
No?
Micro communication.
Yeah, micro communication. So that which is really just attending. Yeah, of course you do. It's just a term. It's just attending to the meaning behind every communication, from I need a cup of coffee, right? And
Right.
how you respond to that in such a way that it's moving, you're always moving everything toward interest and empathy-based dispute resolution. So I guess for me, the greatest contribution I could make to people who are working in the field of empathy, who would like to see corporate culture transformed and would like to see the adversarial system made non-adversarial. And Lord knows it's time. It's 17th century dispute resolution technology. If your doctor was doing 17th century medical technology, you would flee in the other direction. So it's 17th century dispute resolution technology that is completely unsuited for 21st century information-based global disputes. But if I had one thing to say, it would be the attorneys are not your problem. The attorneys are your job. Corporate America is not our problem. Corporate America is our job.
Well, that's the same kind of approach I have as well. There's a lot of people who say, oh, they got to overthrow the corporations or whatever. And I really see that we need to transform corporations so that they're cultures of empathy within the corporations. And we have to kind of start from where are we now towards maybe that vision. And so we need a couple of things. We need a vision of what does a culture of empathy within the legal field look like. And then how do we do all those individual steps towards moving towards that? And it sounds like you're saying, well, empathize with the lawyers, empathize with all parties involved, empathize with the CEOs of the business, of the corporations. So it's really have empathy for the all participants with all organizations and institutions.
Correct. Because if we demonize everyone, we cripple ourselves. Yeah. Demonizing anyone is crippling ourselves. I mean, if we want to talk to Rick Santorum, not something I'm yet up to doing.
So what are you saying?
Saying he's a demon. So I mean, I guess what I do is I go to the worst, the most difficult problem. I was, for instance, I sometimes lose it. Did you ever lose it?
Oh yeah.
I sometimes lose it, and
never happened.
I was mediating a case in which a corporation had been ordered to mediation. Mistake number one, against their will.
So much for the voluntary part.
based on a motion to compel the other side to go to mediation. So that's the context in which I'm mediating, and I'm in the caucus room of the party that was forced into mediation, and the attorney is saying essentially, this is bullshit, la 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 la. I mean, and I'm a prideful person, and I'm not actually used to being disrespected or pushed around much, because being a lawyer is like a ticket to respect, pretty much, as long as you're not a total and complete a-hole. And I finally looked at him and I said, this is not an adversarial process. And he said, yes, it is. And I said,
Well, it
no,
can be.
No,
It
it's
doesn't
not.
have to be.
You are making it an adversarial process. I am a trained mediator who actually knows what I'm doing. And if you would lean into me on the motorcycle instead of leaning against me, we might be able to accomplish something here today. And boy, he left angry, angry, angry. So much for mindfulness and neutrality, but he just pissed me off. But let's get back on topic. I'm sorry I go off topic. Can I talk about sexism?
Could you talk about it in terms of how it affects building a culture of empathy?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Let's start with the place where we most want to build a culture of empathy is in those professions who have among there. Can we has among its core values?
Sorry, could you repeat that? The audio's was a little. Your audio dropped out.
Okay. Can we start with the place where we most need to do empathy work is in those professions whose core values are actually include empathy.
Yeah.
And,
Could you give me an example of those?
yeah, mediation.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start with mediation, whose core value is empathy. Where mediation meets the road of the adversarial system, there is a deep belief on the part of the practitioners in the adversarial system that the job of the mediator is to overwhelm the will of the other side. That's what they want you to do. That's what they hire you for. And that is why they say they don't want women mediators, because they don't believe that women, a generic woman, is strong enough to overwhelm the will of the other side. As you know, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what mediation is about. But I can tell you that mediators in one of the largest litigated mediation market in the country, Los Angeles, have broadly said that the market has spoken. The market has said what it wants. It wants a evaluative, directive, pressured mediation technique in order to get cases settled. That's where we're at. That's where we're at. So this is a major sector in which to build a culture of empathy. And the question is, how do we do so without looking like a bunch of pinko commie, marshmallow roasting, kumbaya singing hippie children?
I think that speaks to me too, because as a mediation trainer, one of the things I'm always trying to put out there is empathy and teaching about empathy. And the way that I've been doing this, even when I teach nonviolent communication workshops, the way that I can talk about empathy and not have it sound like the, fluffy, commie, socialist, whatever the, words may be, is to keep pulling up the science. Science is our friend. Stats are our friends. To say, we're researching this. I think Franz Duval did an amazing job on The Age of Empathy. And he really sums up in the last chapter of that book why we need to start changing our structures and our business structures, including mediation, to a culture of empathy. But
So
pulling out things
where's the
like
point of entry?
the
Where's the
science.
But where's the point of entry when you begin to talk to in the corporate setting or in a legal setting? Where's the point of entry that you get under the defenses and are able to deliver the science and retain respect from your audience?
Well, I could mention, one story is I've been to the Tea Party rallies, to the Republican State Convention here in California, interviewing, Republicans and Tea Party members about empathy. And when I went to the Republican convention, they were very gracious, actually. And they said, "Oh, we're so glad you're here because we always get a bum rap that we're seen as heartless." So they were very gracious, and they introduced me to, some young Republicans. They said, "Oh, be sure," the press secretary said, "Be sure to talk to Edwin here." So there was 3 young kind of fraternity type Republicans. And I said, "Well, tell me, what's your most important value?" And the one guy said, "Protection. Anybody hurt me and my family, we're going to protect ourselves." So I said, "Oh, okay. So protection is really important to you." "That's right. He didn't say it, but we got our guns and whatever."
Right.
So I just kept listening. So I said, "Yeah, so security is really important to you. So it's like, you don't want to be hurt by someone." He says, "Yeah, that's right, And I said, "So what you're concerned about is that there might be people out there who come and do you harm." He says, "Yeah, that's right." And I said, "So you're concerned about these people who aren't empathizing with you. There's these people who are out there, they're not thinking about your well-being. They would come in and, rob you." And he says, "Yeah, that's right." So I said, "So empathy is important." He says, "Yeah, I guess empathy is important." And I said, "Well, yeah, so what can we do to create more empathy in the world?" And so it totally changed the conversation. And there was three of them. And one of them said, "Well, I have to show you something." And he pulled out his iPhone, or smartphone. And he said, "A friend of mine, he was like a total jerk and like totally self-centered, and his mother was dying of cancer, and she wrote this letter to him, and I have a copy of it, and I'd like to read it to you." And he read it right there, but and it said, "Dear son, it's so important that you care about other people because this is what's really important in life." And he went through the whole letter, and he said, "This changed my friend's life." And so I came into this environment, this story of protection, we got to protect ourselves, to, this very intimate sharing of, this story. And so it seemed to be the first thing is listen to what people's concerns are and actually empathize with what their concerns are. So they're concerned about their vulnerability and needing to protect themselves, but then also bring in the empathy part as well. So that was just kind of like one strategy for, kind of engaging in that dialogue.
The problem, I think, in America today is that we empathize with different people.
Mm-hmm.
The right empathizes with the unborn child, and liberals and progressives empathize with the woman. And I can spend, years, and I've talked to Republican and Tea Party women all the time. Their view is not going to change. And given the fact that they would like to, stick a rod up my sister's vaginas before allowing them to exercise their constitutional right to terminate an abortion in the first 3 months, then empathy is not going to get us there. Tit for tat is going to get us there. Some people need to suffer punishment, proportional punishment, in order to be brought back into cooperation, in order to try and run the country, which, you know, Obama's trying, right? He's talked to them and he goes over and he feels their pain, and they're just mean. I mean, they're just mean. They're requiring, you know, welfare recipients to have drug tests. I mean, they're just mean-spirited. They don't want to give money to people who need it. They want to give people the money who don't need it.
Right.
Well,
What do you do with that?
I come at it from, my family is evangelical Christian, so I have these kind of dialogues, you know, when I go visit my family. And I used to be in a very confrontational kind of mode with them. But now I find that the way to really address this is to just empathize and hear them. And I found that as you go deeper and deeper, as I've gone deeper and deeper into their experience, is they see the world as very selfish and greedy, and it's very deeply ingrained in their psyche. And so it takes a modeling of empathy to kind of to address that. So what we see in, you know, MSNBC and Fox News, MSNBC is actually supporting the whole dynamic of that confrontational mode. So they are actually conservative in essence. That's not really conservative, they are confrontational in essence. So they are holding up that whole infrastructure of that conflict.
Right, but I think, you know, I believe that there are places for the use of contentious dispute resolution tactics, and one of the best ones is shaming, which is something
No. That's terrible. Terrible idea.
Let me finish. One of the most effective is shaming, which Jon Stewart did to the country about the 9/11 first responders. And he continues to do it, and it continues to be effective. It's what unions do. That's why you see unions holding signs that say, in my town, shame on Rick Caruso, or shame on Bank of America for not giving janitorial workers, I can't remember what the politically correct term is off the top of my head. I mean,
and it's a tactic that's been used by Gandhi, by Martin Luther King Jr. But I mean, it's a tactic of nonviolent civil disobedience, is shaming, and maybe it's the wording of shaming that I get, that because shame in itself is such a damaging entity, and it just does damage. And I think that those are the things. If we could get people to shift away from that kind of shaming tactic. And it's a tactic I took from, you know, myself as a blogger for many years. And the reason I stopped blogging is because I started realizing that the shaming wasn't working. It wasn't really doing what I saw as the outcome I really want. Yeah, it could be effective. You can make it effective, no doubt. I just think that there are better ways. And I think things like empathizing is so much more powerful.
Brene Brown talks about, has done a lot of exploration of this whole shame and kind of the essence of shame and empathy. And the essence from what I'm hearing from her is that the shaming says what you have done is so bad, you don't deserve empathy and you need to be excommunicated. And so it's using a tactic.
Well, this is a different kind of shaming, I think, than what Brene talks about.
I do understand shaming. I wrote a law review article about it in the restorative justice movement. So, and I have a relatively sophisticated understanding of shame as a paralyzing emotion experienced by people who have been shamed, you know, from their early years. And who condemn themselves rather than being able to separate enough from their actions from who they are so that they can condemn the act instead of themselves, which is obviously an emotionally healthy way to begin to become accountable. But, you know, tit for tat is the most effective dispute resolution technique.
Tit for tat is the most, so sort of an eye for an eye.
No, it's not an eye for an eye. Tit for tat is you open with cooperation. If your dispute resolution partner does not respond with cooperation, you retaliate proportionally. So, you know, you don't like, you know, bring the nuclear weapons out of the silos. You hit somebody over the nose with a rolled up newspaper, or you fall silent, or you say, I'm surprised that you would say such a thing.
It reminds me of, and it might be what you're trying to say. You can correct me if I'm not understanding what you're saying. Is that, you know, Martin Luther King Jr.'s 6 steps to nonviolence were, you know, to gather the information, to educate everyone involved, and then to negotiate. And when the negotiations fail, you then move to direct nonviolent action, so that, you know, and the idea of this is so that it might be what you're saying is that, you know, you start with a collaboration, you start with trying to negotiate, and when that doesn't work, you dig your heels in and say, I'm not moving till we talk.
That's right, and that's shaming. I mean,
that's more political shame. I think there's a difference between, you know, interpersonal shaming and political shaming. And I think that's, am I wrong? Is that what you're really saying is political shaming?
Well, political shaming, there's also shaming when people are acting, that was, shoot. Just unplugged, sorry.
You've reached Steve Goldberg and Vicki Pichon. Please leave us a message.
Oh. I just unplugged it. Sorry. Yeah, but you know, listen, my work is with unbelievably headstrong, largely egocentric, self-righteous people who have a lot of power, who actually possess a lot of power, and can bring that power to bear upon other people, to their own damage, you know, to the damage of the other people and to the damage of their own clients. You cannot, there will be times when shaming someone for behaving badly will bring them relatively quickly back into a cooperative state. I'm not talking about shame-infused individuals who are really, you know, need mental health work. I'm talking about, you should excuse the expression, big swinging dicks. And I know a lot of them. I've spent my life among them. And, you know, you can lead with empathy and cooperation, but when they strike back at you like a rattlesnake, you need to be able to draw a line in the sand and say, don't fuck with me because I can hurt you.
So it's kind of like the boundaries. Within empathy, it's kind of like empathy and how do you deal with boundaries as well.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are too many people, you know, on the one hand, you have the mediators who are stuck in power plays. And on the other hand, you have mediators who are, you know, they just listen to everyone and they empathize with everyone and everyone leaves with the dispute unresolved and, you know, they've not effectively done their job. There's a middle road that a mindful person can follow that is both aspirational, that is inspiring to other people, and that tells other people to stop acting like a fucking asshole and get back into the room and, you know, man up. So that's corporate culture. That's political culture. That's where we want to see change.
And I think the change that we need to make is that, you know, I hear you say that, you know, people need to get to a point to say that, draw a line in the sand and say, look, I can hurt you. And
Yeah.
and I think that is what I'd like to see change. I'd like people to say, look, you know what, I could hurt you and I'm not going to. I refuse to. And the reason I refuse to is because I think we have a better way of working this out. And I think you can draw boundaries. I think you can draw healthy boundaries that draw the line in the sand without having to make threats or without having to wield power in a way that it says I'll take advantage of someone else.
So
And
let me go ahead.
it's more those, and I think when we try to talk about creating a culture of empathy, I'd like to see us start at, you know, looking at the problem before those people that you describe become those people. In other words, those self-righteous, you know, we teach kids, you know, there's a quote, I don't remember exactly, from Gandhi that said something basically to the effect of that the reason that kids can read and do math is because we taught them. And then when you ask about why they can't make peace, you didn't teach them. So if we can go in now while kids are young, changing our educational structures, changing our, you know, the way we're doing things so that when kids are graduating college and university, they're graduating with a sense of empathy. They're graduating with the knowledge that with the understanding that you can do things with power with versus power over. Power under, or for that matter, power under, that there are other ways. And these are not things that we're teaching people. And hence we don't have them.
Let me tell you about the internationally famous 7 years running #1 rated dispute resolution institute in the world, the Strauss Institute at Pepperdine Law School.
Mm-hmm.
When I was there, 2004 to 06, a rising 1L, a young man who was about to enter his second year of law school, committed suicide, in part because he was struggling with his sexual identity. Pepperdine University is owned by the Church of Christ, and they're, you know, we love the sinner but hate the sin people. I tried to start a fund to have a memorial to this young man on campus. I mean, like a tree, right? Plant a tree. I wasn't planning a Vietnam War memorial. I was told that was inappropriate. I took it all the way up to the top, which at the time was Ken Starr, of Monica Lewinsky fame.
I was going to say of the, you know, but yeah.
Ken Starr. And it's now been 6 years since that day. There is a group on the Pepperdine campus called Reach Out. It's an LGBT support group. And the law school has been asked, and the Dispute Resolution Institute has been asked to either support the support group for Pepperdine's LGBT students on campus, or at least have a public dialogue about it. The university itself has a program called Building Bridges, which has been working for 4 years to have loving dialogue with the sinners in the LGBT community, and nothing has changed. Because nothing will change ever, they believe that they are loving and accepting. They're wrong, but they will not change their beliefs because their beliefs are Bible-based. So then the question is, what do the LGBT students do? What I have done is created an alumni boycott, saying that no alumni no alums who care about LGBT rights should donate as an alumni to Pepperdine and tell at least the law school and the Strauss Institute support the presence of a support group on campus.
So yeah, it kind of ties in with what I'm kind of the way I've kind of looked at it is that we need kind of a larger value of empathy within society, is that to kind of raise up the value of empathy as kind of a national cultural value and kind of be very conscious about it. So
Right.
it's to engage, it's for Pepperdine to say, okay, well, let's come together in a circle. I mean, is it, let us let us value empathy. You know, it's like, say, this is this a value that we can, you know, come around, the value of empathy, and what can we do to create a culture of empathy around that? Because they're feeling maybe threatened. You know, they probably want to feel heard about their, you know, what's underneath that adherence to the Bible. So that rigid adherence to it's what?
These are people who are not. These are people who are not going to change their minds. They believe that they empathize.
Yeah.
The president of the university said, "I will put." He says the only thing that the LGBT students are missing is one, the ability to meet on campus, because they can meet at the coffee shop down the street. And two, we give $250 to them. I'm happy to pull $250 out of my pocket and give it to them personally because I love them. And a co-director of the Institute told me we might as well have a promiscuous students club on campus. And this is a guy who has taught tens of thousands of lawyers the principles that you're talking about. But his empathy is trumped by what he sees as the authority of the Bible. And when you have a situation where young people are suicidal, you cannot spend a decade, you cannot spend another decade building bridges until the university comes around to recognizing that there's a problem that they need to address now before somebody else dies. Right?
Yeah, so it's like immediate needs, immediate concerns that we can't kind of have this longer term dialogue or something. We need to,
Right.
It's kind of like there's this violence taking place right now. We got to stop that violence.
Right, exactly. I mean, we have to stop. You know, how many women have to go to a doctor and have their vagina probed? How many women are going to be traumatized by that experience while we sit around and have circles to talk with evangelical Christians about how they feel? I don't give a flying fuck how they feel.
Have you by chance read Peter Coleman's book?
My reproductive cycle. Nor should
Have
they
you read Peter Coleman's book on the 5%?
No.
It's one of the things that he proposes in this book, the 5%, is that conflicts like abortion versus pro-life versus pro-choice, or Israel versus Palestine, or evangelicals against, up against gay rights, that these are what he calls conflicts, intractable conflicts that are part of what he calls the 5%. That these conflicts have gone beyond the people in them and have now taken life of their own, that they've almost become self-sustaining. And that our typical dispute resolution practices, including things like mediation and empathy, are not only ineffective at dealing with these type of conflicts, they can also be harmful and cause them to be worse. Which It sounds like you're actually describing that situation, how it's become worse in attempts to solve it. And
right.
So he goes on to sort of give some elaborate ideas about how we could approach those things in ways that would be effective at, and working towards solutions. I think as you start teaching people empathy younger, I think what you end up with is less people who fall into this rigidity. And I know Brene Brown talks about that in her TED Talk, about how we've become so certain that, you know, I'm right, you're wrong. Like, we live on this certainty that I think empathy helps you to avoid.
I agree, but I'm just going to the worst because I'm on the same page with you guys in every way. I'm just going to the worst problems because those are the problems that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
You know, and so what do I do? I mean, it's great they, you know, lawyers, but, you know, there are people working in sweatshops and distribution centers all across the country in conditions that we would abhor if we heard about them existing in China. What do we do about it? What do we do about Amazon? You know, I think we need collective action. I don't think you're going to get anywhere by sitting down with Jeff Bezos and saying, I want you to, you know, feel the pain of the 60-year-old woman who is running herself to death in your distribution center, so that you can cut your costs even thinner, so that you and your stockholders can make more money. I don't think he cares. I don't think he's going to begin to care. I think he needs to feel pain. I know you guys are looking like, she's a bitch.
No, I think what I hear you saying is that, you know, let me give you some empathy. I think what I hear you saying is that you feel doubtful that, you know, this guy's going to change without some sort of real kick in the butt. Yep. And I think the question comes down to, what is that kick in the butt? And where we differ is that you think that that might be some pain and suffering, and I think that that could come some other way. Did you see that TV show that was out for a while there? It was a TV series where these CEOs of companies would go and pretend that they were just hired as a low-line worker in their own companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I forget what it was called, but I thought, you know, that's the kind of kick in the butt that they really need, and that was really empathy. That, talk about standing in the shoes of one of your workers. You just went and tried to be one. And
so how do we get Jeff Bezos to do that?
Ask him.
How do we get? Okay, I mean, let's do it
right now.
Let's
see
do
if
it.
he sees this video.
Let's use this. Let's use your resources and mine to take this problem, which is a huge problem. Hundreds of thousands of people who are working for $7 an hour and who are fired if they're a minute late during their first week on the job, a minute, and who are being driven to the point where many of them collapse. And they're working in conditions, and they're told, you know, there are millions more to replace you.
Right.
You know, if you don't like it here, there's no chance that they're going to be unionized. There's no chance for collective bargaining. What do we do? If we're going to approach it through empathy, let's use the Center for Empathy and, you know, the connections that I have to ask the chief executive officers of the top 10 internet consumer product companies to go and spend a day in their own distribution centers. I think that's a hell of an idea. Let's do it.
So I'm looking at the clock. And
you want to do it?
I'm up for anything that moves this forward. I kind of see it as we need the larger social value of empathy. We need to raise the value of empathy within society. And there's all these different ways that we can do that, and that's one of them. And it sounds like you really want to take some action, kind of some immediate action around this. I'm
a lawyer, I'm an action person.
So I have a question for you, Victoria. So we read your article, we did this first video, talking about your article, and now we're doing this sort of follow up. And a really good friend of mine, who's a professor at Quinnipiac University, showed her students your article, and then your blog post about negotiation, and then followed up with that to show them the video that Edwin and I had done. And now her plan, she was actually going to join us on this call today, and that didn't work out. But she plans to show this video we've just made to her her mediation class.
Oh, but she can't do that because I use the F word. I'm kidding.
They're big boys and girls.
I'm kidding.
So and I have to admit, I probably used the F word when I went and taught them for a class. So I heard you say earlier that and it's a mediation class. It's a mediation course. Yeah. And she's a professor in the legal studies department at Quinnipiac. And I heard you say earlier that you really think it's important that we start training mediators in empathy. So now you have this, sort of voice to say hi to the mediation, Professor Hines mediation class at Quinnipiac. What would you tell those students? They're training some of them will go on to law school. Some of them are just going to become paralegals. Many of them will become mediators. What would you tell them?
I tell them that, and this is what I tell to the students who participate in the mediation contest that the ABA runs when I'm judging it, and that is empathy is all well and good, but when you get out into the legal system, if you don't know how to play tit for tat, they will rip you to shreds. They will rip you to shreds. Please take these skills to do as much as you can to end a fight over interrogatory responses or conduct a meeting.
We lost you.
File a substantive motion. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, your audio kind of kicks out every now and then.
Okay. You use these skills in your micro day. Use these skills every time you have a conversation counsel. If possible, meet opposing counsel in a coffee shop so that you have the opportunity to share small talk, which is one of the best ways to get the parties to reveal what their real interests are and to establish a bond of trust that will allow you to ask for favors and give favors when they're necessary so that it will save both of your clients the time and money, the wasteful time and money that lawyers spend just, bristling with arms to prove to the other side that they can get them. But you must always be alert to the fact that opposing counsel is constantly assessing where you are weak and will use knowledge of your weakness to play the litigation game. And the litigation game is to disable you, to render you harmless, to frighten you, to diminish you in front of the court, to diminish you in front of your own client, and to win at all costs. That's the game. If you start inserting mediation skills in the zone of proximal development, in the area where people are capable of changing, it will still be frustrating for you, but you will begin to move the needle finally from an adversarial to a collaborative problem-solving, business solution resolution to our disputes, because the adversarial system is, the only good thing about it is that it's better than trial by battle.
And what's funny, it reminds me, as I hear you say that, in order for me to figure out your next move and how I could tear it apart, I need to use empathy.
Oh, we do that all the time. And I have asked attorneys, I am out in a separate caucus, to write the other side's closing argument and then to give it to me when I come back in the room. And they do so passionately and with great understanding of the weaknesses of their own case. And then they say, and I'm right and they're wrong.
Okay. Let's see, what was I going to say here? It's we've gone about an hour and 20 minutes. We probably should wrap this up. But I really feel, Victoria, that you're wanting to take some kind of some action, and I can kind of feel it in my body. And I would like to take action too. But the action I'm working on now is on holding these Skype conferences, panels on how we can build a culture of empathy. So I would love to continue this dialogue, maybe take, various aspects of it to explore and bring in more people as well. So if you'd like to continue these dialogues, I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I'd love to cut the video. I'd love to see you cut it into segments instead of run the whole thing, because people won't watch the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's much more powerful if you had like 3 minutes, and that's what I've been told by my marketing and web
Yeah.
people.
So break it up.
And hold somebody's. It's pretty easy to. I've done it, and I'm technologically retarded, so.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, we can do that.
And
We're going to need to work
you know.
on the audio too, because we had a little problem with your audio. So
The next time I did it, I would plug directly into the internet and not rely on the wireless. That's the problem.
yeah,
The wireless is always going in and out.
yeah, that's happened before with others too.
And let me say that I am working on being a more mindful and peaceful person. The environment in which I function is extraordinarily hostile. And I think that you'll see with most lawyers is that they're strongly opinionated. They want to take immediate action, and they have little patience for soft solution problems. And I know that empathy, building a culture of empathy, is not a soft solution. And I say challenging things primarily because I need the answers. So these are, I'm channeling to you what I hear the people who have the dispute resolution market cornered feel about mediation. And as
I've
long
been
as
doing mediation for or mediation training now for several years, and my last session or last 40-hour basic that we taught had a lawyer in it, which I'll ask you, Edwin, if you can cut this part out so that it's not publicly heard. But
Don't say anything. I'm trying not to cut it. It's too much work. So say only what you want public.
But I had so I'll just change it. I'll say that it was a female lawyer, and I had a lawyer that was, and I've had several. This has happened several times, but I had one lawyer who's just like, you could see him holding on to his adversarial, standpoint as he took the mediation course. And of course, I teach nonviolent communication in our mediation courses. So our 40-hour basic mediation training also combines a lot of Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. Because I believe, and the reason that I do that is because really what I think people see as positions and interests can really be boiled down to strategies and needs. And this guy really, really held on to that, adversarial thing. And when I started talking about bringing in feelings into negotiation, he was just like, no. And I would get these. At one point, he emailed me at, I don't know, you could see the timestamp. It was like 2 a.m. He emailed me and said, "Don't give up on me."
Sweet.
So
Sweet.
I think the message in there, as the non-attorney mediator, I can empathize with where that is, and that training that it's almost the legal training that lawyers get is meant to lessen their ability to empathize so that they can better do their job.
Yes. Well, let me leave you with something that my mentor, Ken Clope, said to me that has solved a multitude of my own problems. And that is, behind every accusation is a cry for help.
Yeah.
Okay, a really nice ending. I'm actually going to Bolt Hall, UC Berkeley Law School, Bolt Hall this afternoon. And Charlie Helpern, who's a professor there, he's started a mindfulness kind of a subgroup, a center there. And they're going to have someone there talking. They have a speaker series. So I'm going to try to see if I can get some of the people over there in on some of these calls. So I look forward to our next call. And this was just wonderful, wonderful call. Thank you so much, Victoria, and Joe, for just taking the time to take part in this.
It was fun.
Yeah, this is where you should have, like, rolling credits and some happy music, and we all wave.
If Edwin could get it together and use iMovie,
Yeah.
Yeah.
do that really easily.
Definitely, we'll get it. We'll up the production values. Definitely, as soon as I start making some money at this.
Yeah,
Get a grant. Write
Get a grant. Okay. Well, I'm gonna stop the recording right here.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.